few weeks come together this week. One of the themes is the world is mad, completely bonkers, and the other is the network of Western orchestrated and engineered terrorist groups that are causing mayhem in the Middle East and Africa to create the circumstances for a Western takeover, cabal takeover. And those two themes come together in this organization that's, of course, all over the news because of what it's doing now in Iraq, a group called ISIS. And now that's a very significant name, which I'll get to later. ISIS is the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, because they want to take over that whole area. And the Islamic State in Iraq and Al-Sham is another version of ISIS. And Al-Sham is actually very appropriate, although perhaps Al-Scam would be much better, because a scam it is. It's another movie, a horror movie, yes, but it's another movie designed to orchestrate events that eventually will allow the subjugation and control of the whole of the Middle East and, in the end, the whole of Africa. Now, this ISIS was supposed to have kind of started about 2004, but it was in April 2013 that it took the present name and started heading towards what it's doing now. And it's said that it is an outgrowth, if you like, from Al-Qaeda. And the propaganda is that it's so extreme, ISIS, that it was too extreme for Al-Qaeda. Now, they are trying to, or have spent all these years, seeking to sell us the lie that this Al-Qaeda organization was behind 9/11. And if you can get more extreme than doing what happened on that day, they didn't, but the propaganda wants us to believe that, then how extreme must this ISIS be, according to this propaganda, that it's too extreme for Al-Qaeda? Load of bloody rubbish. And let's go back to a base position here, in fact, a database position. And that is that there is no Al-Qaeda in the way that it is portrayed by Western propaganda, the way that it is described in terms of its structure. This is Robin Cook, former British Foreign Secretary, very soon before he died, actually. And he said this: throughout the 1980s, Osama bin Laden was armed by the CIA and funded by the Saudis to wage jihad against the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda, literally the database, was originally, he said, the computer file of the thousands of mujahideen who were recruited and trained with help from the CIA to defeat the Russians. Inexplicably, Cook says, and with disastrous consequences, it never appears to have occurred to Washington that once Russia was out of the way, bin Laden's organization would turn its attention to the West. Well, it's not inexplicable. It's how the game works. The idea is to create these terror groups, or in many cases, create the belief in these terror groups and how they operate, to justify, under the problem, reaction, solution scenario, create the problem, get the reaction, do something, then offer the solution to the problems you have created. Under the problem, reaction, solution technique, to justify intervention into countries because of terrorism, and justifying more and more freedoms and basic civil rights being taken away in your own country on the excuse of protecting the population from terrorism. And on this Al-Qaeda situation, here's Jason Burke, author of Al-Qaeda Casting a Shadow of Terror. He's talking on a BBC program called The Power of nightmares. And that is, in many ways, problem, reaction, solution. The power of nightmares. Get people to experience or think they're experiencing a nightmare or potential nightmare, and then save them from the nightmare which you have created. Anyway, Jason Burke says this about Al-Qaeda. The idea, which is critical to the FBI's prosecution, that bin Laden ran a coherent organization with operatives and cells all around the world of which you could be a member is a myth, he said. There is no Al-Qaeda organization. There is no international network with a leader, with cadres who will unquestioningly obey orders, with tentacles that stretch out to sleeper cells in America, in Africa, in Europe. That idea of a coherent, structured terrorist network with an organized capability simply does not exist. But what he was talking about there was Al-Qaeda at that time. This ISIS situation is different. This is a new stage. This would appear to be a very organized network, extremely organized, immensely well funded. I mean, I've seen figures of maybe $2 billion they have at their disposal, and extremely well armed with American weaponry for reasons I'll come to. And here's a big piece in the Daily Mail newspaper this week, Jihadi Terror Group PLC. And the reason they call it PLC is because they've produced accounts, like annual accounts of a company, detailing the finances, but also detailing all the murders they've done, the beheadings they've done, and all these horrors that they're carrying out. And it's just like a PLC has produced it. And this is a highly organized operation. And this is, like I say, a new stage. Now, one of the things that I've been writing about for many years is the fact that the plan was to create massive divide and rule of the Arab world, the Muslim world, through playing Shia Muslims off against the Sunnis, to create conflict and upheaval. And there's nothing like chaos to exploit your goals. The 33rd degree of Freemasonry has a motto, ordo ab chaos, order out of chaos. And that is problem, reaction, solution. Create the problem, create the chaos, then offer the order out of the chaos. But it's your order, your new order, your new structure of control. And what we see here with this ISIS group is that Sunni Shia schism being massively and blatantly exploited, because the ISIS group claim to be Sunni, and certainly Sunni Muslims believe that's the case, although some people question that, because some people say, well, actually behind it, and I would be one of them, is not even anything to do with Islam. But they are seen as Sunni, and they are attacking the Shia population of Iraq. And what's been kind of bewildering to a lot of people recently, and I understand it, is that after all this condemnation of Iran, and we ought to attack Iran, we ought to take the nuclear capability out and all that, suddenly in very recent times they've been talking about, well, maybe we ought to come to some agreement with Iran over what we do about this ISIS group. Well, the ISIS group are Sunni, and Iran is basically the center of the Shia world. 89% of Iranians are Shia Muslims. And so what it would seem to me is happening with Iran is there's an attempt to draw them into this situation with ISIS on the basis of protecting Shia Muslims from their attacks. And once they're drawn in, that whole conflict then ensues and they can't get out. Because what this whole thing is about is creating so much mayhem and upheaval in the Middle East, in that whole area, including the area all around Israel, which I'll get to in a minute, that eventually there is an intervention to protect people. Out of that comes what they've been working towards for a very, very, very long time, and that is World War III. The world designed, or the war designed, to transform the world, even from what it is now in terms of freedom, into a global fascist dictatorship. So, what's going on with ISIS? Well, another part of this whole scenario is what's going on in Ukraine. It's no accident they're happening together, because what they want, as I've been again writing for years about, is they want to draw Russia and China in to a conflict with the West. That was basically what the World War III is designed to be. And what's happening now with Ukraine, now this fascist government, this neo-Nazi government is in power, controlled by the West, is that there's a front opening up there, slowly but surely, with Russia to take their attention and resources away from what's happening in the Middle East. So the plan is to create so much chaos and upheaval all across the Middle East and down into Africa by using these various terror groups to orchestrate the horrors that we're seeing, to justify the eventual intervention into those countries. And, you know, whether it's Boko Haram in Nigeria, and they're now moving into other countries as well, they go under different names, but they have the same, in the shadows, the same source of control and manipulation to the same goal, which is problem, upheaval, war, terror, solution, intervention to protect the people. But you'll note at the moment that although the United States, under multiple presidents, has, you know, been unable to contain itself in terms of wanting to bomb these and bomb them and all that, they're not talking about that now with this ISIS situation, even though, you know, it was their invasion along with Britain's Tony Blair that has actually created the ground, the situation, the environment for this to happen. They're not talking about any military intervention, because, not yet, because they want this ISIS thing to move further on, and for them to get a much greater foothold in that region, so that a full-blown intervention can eventually come, not least on the premise of protecting Israel, which of course is in that very area of the Levant that this ISIS group says it wishes to turn into an extreme Muslim state. Another area of interest with ISIS is Syria, because they are in Syria fighting against the Assad regime. And so it's now so, see, people think that this is contradictory against that, and that's contradictory against that, but it's not. The thing that stops the contradictions is whatever suits the agenda is done. So in Syria, ISIS is doing what the US, Britain want. They're fighting, attacking the Assad regime, which they want to bring down. But this is in the public arena, not in reality, I'm talking about here. But in Iraq, the same ISIS is now doing things which, in public, the Americans and the British, etc., the cabal, don't want to happen. But in fact, they want both of them to happen. They just condemn one for public consumption. ISIS is supporting the agenda by fighting Assad, and it's supporting the agenda by causing the mayhem in Iraq, because the idea is to create mayhem throughout the Middle East and thus a problem reaction solution scenario. Now, another confirmation that ISIS is not what it seems is it's being funded by Saudi Arabia. I mean, who the heck does Saudi Arabia not fund so long as they are going to create terrorism and upheaval? And Qatar have been mentioned as well in terms of funding and support for ISIS. Now, both Qatar and the Saudis are 51st states of the United States, of which there are a legion. And so you have the United States condemning ISIS and what they're doing in Iraq, while their satellite states are helping to create it, as they indeed funded the rebels in Libya, which was just another situation where you fund, arm, and train rebels to terrorize the country and to attack the Gaddafi regime. And then when Gaddafi responds, he's killing his own people, and we have to go in and bomb city after city to protect the civilians from violence. It's all part of the same ongoing scenario. Now, the Iraq-Afghanistan occupation by the Americans never ended. It just took a different form. They may have taken a lot of the troops out, but the control didn't disappear. And they have replaced them with these private armies, these mercenary so-called security organizations, which answer to the Pentagon. They're just an arm of the military, but because they're called private and civilian organizations, then the Pentagon can do what it wants behind the cover, that it's not really involved in this country at all, really. We pulled the troops out. And what this situation with ISIS will eventually allow them to do is to justify massive intervention, in effect World War III, to get rid of the terrorists from the Middle East, by which time they want this ISIS organization to be overrunning a very much larger area than they are now. And they're doing it. They're doing it with American weapons, because you can arm an organization directly. You can arm it secretly. And there's another option, which is what we're seeing here, is that you arm apparently someone else, in this case the Iraqi government, the Iraqi military, with vast amounts of state-of-the-art weapons, knowing that this group's coming because you're orchestrating it, training it, funding it. And as they overrun the Iraqi government forces, as they're doing currently, then all that American weaponry is theirs. And in fact, there are reports that ISIS have now got so much state-of-the-art weaponry and military vehicles, etc., that they don't need them all for Iraq. They're shipping them some into Syria to help with the fight against Assad. And this is a Fox News report. US-made Stinger missiles have likely fallen into ISIS hands, officials say. You do surprise me. US officials with access to the latest US intelligence on Iraq told Fox News it appears likely, probable, that US-made Stinger missiles have fallen into the hands of Sunni insurgents. It is possible that the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, ISIS fighters, acquired them from army bases they have taken over in recent days. The Stinger missile is a shoulder-fired surface-to-air weapon that is used against aircraft. And ISIS forces, as they advance through Iraq, the report says, concerns have increased that more US-made weaponry can fall into the hands of the radical group, which is precisely what the plan is. According to a report from the West Point Combating Terrorism Center, the ISIS, quote, now possess scores of Iraqi military equipment originally provided by the United States, from Humvees and cargo vehicles to small arms. And this is another report that says ISIS has secured so many US-made vehicles, like I just mentioned, that they don't even need them all on the Iraq side of their new Islamic State. And reports say they're sending a number of US-made tanks, trucks and Humvees into Syria to be used by ISIS fighters on the Syrian front. Perhaps even more dangerous, it says US officials say it is probable that US-made anti-aircraft missiles are now in ISIS hands, meaning all air traffic in the region is in serious danger. And it's all orchestrated. Two birds, one stone. You provide them with the weapons to overrun Iraq, and you provide weaponry for those that you want to overthrow, Assad in Syria. And the timing's perfect. Headline: War industry stands to make billions off ISIS threat. I'm staggered. Says here, last month it was announced a few outstanding members of the military-industrial complex would stand to rake in around $1 billion if an arms sale to the Iraqi government was approved by Congress. Now, with what's going on in Iraq with this ISIS onslaught, do you reckon there's just a little bit of a chance that Congress might approve that? I think there probably is. And down here it's talking about in December, the New York Times reported the Obama administration had provided the Iraqi military with 3 sensor-laden aerostat balloons, given 3 additional reconnaissance helicopters to the Iraqi military, and said it planned to send 48 Raven reconnaissance drones before the end of this year. In addition, the US said it would plan to deliver this fall F-16 fighters that Iraq has bought. If delivered ahead of schedule, the report says, in response to the current situation, there is a distinct possibility this military hardware will fall into the hands of ISIS, just as it is meant to. Now, in this situation, you also have screaming at you the name Israel. I'm doing this on Friday. You'll see it on the Sunday. But up to this point, as I speak, Israel's been remarkably quiet, from what I've seen anyway, on what's happening in Iraq. And yet you'd think they'd be kind of screaming very loudly indeed. They may well do, but they haven't yet. Because in this area that this ISIS terror group, with all this military hardware, wants to take over and turn into an extreme Islamic state, this Iraq, Syria, and the Levant, is Israel. And Israel, of course, has a phenomenal military capability, including a massive nuclear arsenal, all paid for by the United States. And the United States has said that it will intervene to protect Israel whenever it's under threat. Well, what's happening at the moment, as I speak, is the Americans' government is saying we're not bringing about military intervention in Iraq. And the reason for that is that they want ISIS to go further. But there's going to come a point in this story, if it unfolds as it currently is, where Israel is going to start coming under threat. And that will then justify a massive American intervention to protect our allies, and also the unleashing of the enormous military capability of Israel. And then you have a scenario for World War III. At least if Syria starts getting overrun, Russia supporting Syria, China also has support for Syria, and here we go, and there we are. And it's not a coincidence that there is a concept, a plan called Greater Israel. And in 2013, Mako Chosadovsky of Global Research wrote an article about this headed Greater Israel, the Zionist Plan for the Middle East. Now, he wrote this in 2013, and when you look at current events, it fits like the proverbial. It says, according to the founding father of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, the area of the Jewish state stretches, quote, from the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates. According to Rabbi Fitchman, the promised land extends from the river of Egypt up to the Euphrates in Iraq, of course. It includes parts of Syria and Lebanon. So you're looking at this Greater Israel scenario, and it's fitting this area of land, or much of it, that this ISIS group says it wants to take over. And he talks here in this article about the plan to achieve this Greater Israel. Consists of weakening and eventually fracturing neighboring Arab states as part of an Israeli expansionist project. And again, what are we seeing now in Iraq for a start, other than a fracturing? What are we seeing in Syria other than a fracturing? Greater Israel, the article says, would create a number of proxy states. It would include parts of Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, the Sinai, as well as parts of Iraq and Saudi Arabia. And he says Israeli strategists viewed Iraq as their biggest strategic challenge from an Arab state. This is why Iraq, he said, was outlined as the centerpiece to the balkanization of the Middle East and the Arab world. In Iraq, on the basis of the concepts of the Yinon plan, that's the plan to bring about the Greater Israel, Israeli strategists have called for the division of Iraq into a Kurdish state and two Arab states, one Shiite Muslims and the other Sunni Muslims. Well, we're very clearly seeing that unfolding with this ISIS scenario currently. The first step towards establishing this was a war between Iraq and Iran, which the Yinon plan discusses. Now, at the time, you'd think that, a war between Iraq and Iran was pretty unlikely after the end of Saddam Hussein. But what you've got now is this Sunni insurgents by this ISIS group attacking Shia Muslims. And the idea is that you can bring Iran in to protect the Shia, and that then creates, in effect, a war between at least parts, the ISIS parts of Iraq and Iran. It's not impossible. The article goes on. The Atlantic in 2008 and the US Military's Armed Forces Journal in 2006, I mean, this is quite a few years ago now, both published widely circulated maps that closely followed the outline of the Yinon plan. Aside from a divided Iraq, the Yinon plan calls for a divided Lebanon, Egypt, and Syria. Well, Syria, it's not divided currently, is it? The partitioning of Iran, Turkey, Somalia, and Pakistan also fall into line with these views. The Yinon plan also calls for the dissolution in North Africa and forecasts it as starting from Egypt and then spilling over into Sudan, Libya, and the rest of the region. That's what's happened. And of course, in Libya, they removed Gaddafi, who would have probably caused them a lot of problems with what they're trying to do, but he's gone now. And the article says, viewed in this context, the war on Syria is part of the process of Israeli territorial expansion. Israeli intelligence, working hand in glove with the US, Turkey, and NATO, is directly supportive of al-Qaeda terrorist mercenaries inside Syria, and they're directly supportive of the ISIS ones as well. And says the Zionist project also requires the destabilization of Egypt. Well, that's not happened, has it? the creation of factional divisions within Egypt as instrumented by the Arab Spring. Then you ask the question, this ISIS group is supposed to be extreme Muslim, extreme Sunni Muslim, but are they? This is an article, is ISIS really Sunni? Not at all. And this is a quote from the Islamic scholar Dr. John Andrew Morrow. He says, a lot of so-called jihad, holy war, is not rooted in Islam, especially if you look at who's funding it, who's supporting it, who's behind it. Western powers have a long history of using jihadists and Islamists to further their own imperial ambitions. In terms of the foot soldiers, they may think they're fighting for Islam, but if you look closer, you find they're furthering the cause of the enemy. And, you know, this is very relevant when he's talking there about the foot soldiers. You know, people are so stupid. They're so controlled by their belief system, so full of their own need for omnipotence, that they will be putty in the hands of these manipulators. So they say, oh yes, the ISIS, we're for Sunni Muslims and a real kind of extreme Islamic state, Allah. And so, oh yeah, we'll fight for you, mate, yeah. Oh yeah, I've just seen it on Twitter, I'm going off fighting for this. And it's just a scam. It's just a front. Nothing to do with religion, it's to do with divide and bloody rule. And Dr. Morrow points out that much of ISIS's behavior is patently un-Islamic. He said that their terrorists love to film themselves committing war crimes that are forbidden by Islam, and they're proud to commit atrocities. They film it, they upload it to the internet, they have their own websites. You know, in fact, you know, this whole ISIS operation is not just extremely efficient and PLC in terms of money, but it's state of the art in terms of social media. You know, this is a seriously well-funded and organized operation, and it's being orchestrated out of the West. Zaid Ahmed, a Sunni Muslim defense analyst from Pakistan, says ISIS and related terrorist groups are not Sunnis. He calls them heretics from his point of view. And he says that they are serving an anti-Islamic agenda. Yes, everything is inverted. Everything is inverted. The world's inverted. So, yeah, we're fighting for Islam. No, we're fighting to destroy it by doing this on behalf of those that wish to destroy it. Hamid argues that the ultra-radical groups destabilizing Pakistan, Syria and Iraq have indeed stepped outside of Islam and are making war on Islam and Muslims on behalf of Zionism and imperialism. And that's exactly what they are doing, not just in the Middle East, but throughout, increasingly throughout Africa. But there's another aspect to this, the ISIS crisis. Interesting, isn't it? You get ISIS in the name, crisis. I'll come to ISIS in a minute. And that is justifying still more control, surveillance, loss of freedoms and civil liberties in the Western countries, who are trying to currently frighten the population with the nightmare of these terrorists, these ISIS terrorists who have been and are fighting in Iraq, coming back home, those that come from Britain or America, wherever, and bringing the terrorism back home and the Holy War back home to Britain and other European countries and North America, etc. I mean, that wasn't kind of predictable, was it? We've had in America this week, Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham. This is a man who never opens his mouth unless he's speaking the words of the cabal that hold his strings. He's a mate of John McCain, ditto. And he's been talking this week about the probability of another 9/11 happening in the United States as a result of what's currently happening in the Middle East. And we've had David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, this is the headline, Iraq crisis, jihadists planning UK attacks, warns David Cameron. He's saying that the jihadists fighting in Iraq and Syria are planning attacks in the UK as the Iraqi government asks the US to launch airstrikes against militants. Jihadists are going to come back and cause mayhem here, he's talking about. And he said that he's insurgents from Iraq, Somalia, Nigeria, and Mali. I mean, how many bloody more? I mean, just that statement, insurgents from Iraq, Somalia, Nigeria, and Mali, you can see how it's spreading across the Middle East and Africa. And he said, as well as those in Syria, must be dealt with, or the problems will come back and hit us at home. And we've had this man who I don't use the word madness as a symbol. I use it literally. Tony Blair, who has been saying that the invasion of Iraq by Blair and Bush, based on known lies, is in no way responsible for what's happening now, when it actually created the very circumstances for which this could happen. And Cameron's saying that ministers are ensuring that intelligence, security and policing services will focus as sharply as they can be on this problem of, terrorism at home. And so what you're going to be seeing is more and more efforts to take away more and more freedoms on the basis of protecting the population from the terrorists which they have created. Now, ISIS. Symbolism is the language of this cabal, this network. They have their own language of symbolism, which they understand. And, you see the obvious ones like the all-seeing eye and the pyramid and all-seeing eye on the dollar bill and the lighted torch. These are all the obvious ones, but they have a whole language of symbolism, and they have their own religion. It's satanic religion, but it's a kind of religion with its gods and its goddesses, and one of them is called ISIS. Now, if you are a extreme Islamic terror group, why do you have a wording in your name that allows it to be broken down to the short-term ISIS? Why? I mean, you say, "Hey up, mate! No, this means ISIS. We better change the wording so it don't." But that's what has happened. And see, ISIS is the goddess. I'll get to some background in a second. But it's a goddess of darkness and chaos, which is exactly what is happening because of what ISIS is doing in Iraq. And that's another thing, isn't it? Have you noticed now, once you call this group ISIS, the goddess of these people, then you are pulling newsreaders and news reporters into using language like ISIS forces have taken over Mosul. ISIS is closing in on Baghdad. ISIS is doing this. ISIS is doing that. They must be laughing their socks off as these news reports are read. ISIS is doing this. ISIS is going there. ISIS is claiming this. And this is an article on GnosticWarrior.com. ISIS, goddess of darkness and chaos. So the goddess Isis was also known to the Sumerians as Tiamat, the serpent of chaos, the ancient one, mother of the gods and all abominations of chaos. Exactly what Isis is doing in its terrorist form. The Egyptian god Set was originally a female deity and was identified with Isis. Set is a god of the desert, storms, and foreigners in ancient Egyptian religion. In later myths, he's also a god of darkness and chaos, hence the connection with the Sumerian Tiamat, the serpent of chaos. It says Bible scholars often associate the dragon with the devil. Can't think why. And we find Isis has morphed into Typhoon, which means terrible mother, also associated with the dragon. The Sumerian Tiamat, who is the serpent of chaos, could be to some the equivalent of what they may call the devil, and this would be where we later would get the Egyptian connection to the goddess in Egypt, Isis. They did terrible things and are associated with serpents, darkness, and chaos. And Isis became a powerful deity of the late Egyptian dynasties of the Greeks and the Romans, which a lot of this symbolism came out of. They used a lot of Roman symbolism, a lot of Greek symbolism, a lot of Egyptian symbolism, because basically it's a progression of the same thing to present day. And it says you'll find Cleopatra had always appeared in public clothed in a robe sacred to Isis, and magic, her central role as the goddess of darkness and chaos, we know as our current world, and we certainly know as the current situation in the Middle East, and particularly Iraq. So, once again, we're watching a movie. The movie is playing out on the television news, and we don't have journalists most of the time. We have movie correspondents. They're basically just writing articles about a movie. And what they want us to believe is that this is a spontaneous outgrowth from this Al-Qaeda, and that they are, through their own devices and through their own motivation, seeking to impose an extreme Islamic state on that entire area of the Middle East, including Israel. I mean, where's that going to end, for goodness sake? And that all their funding, all their organization, all their state-of-the-art social media is all coming spontaneously from them. It's not. It's another front which allows you to create a terrorist group, fund it, arm it, and train it, but in public condemn it while you control it. And when it does the dastardly deeds that you are orchestrating it to do, you can then reach a point where you say, we can't stand by and let this happen any longer. We must intervene. And what they want is the situation by then to be so bad that the current public hostility to more intervention, as was seen when they tried to get agreement to bomb Syria, that they will so get it to an extreme point that they will break down that public resistance to more military intervention. That's where we're going. And that military intervention is designed to be the trigger for World War III. And so we can buy the lie, or we can choose to see through it. And how many do one or how many do the other will be very, very significant, because this is a very, very significant moment. I mean, I've been following the story and this unfolding agenda for a long, long time. And I'll say this is a very significant moment that we're witnessing now. It is the start of another stage, upping the ante and ratcheting up the situation of seeking to trigger World War III, which is designed to transform the world from even what it is now in terms of freedom into a global fascist dictatorship. So these are interesting times, as the Chinese say, and it will be very interesting to see how this unfolds in the next few days and weeks. Anyway, that's it. I hope you've got something out of it in terms of the background to what's currently happening, and I'll see you next week. Bye.